I want to introduce myself. My name is Ariella Wise. I'm actually past national president of Emunah and part of the board. And I want to welcome everybody to our second cooking demonstration. Last week we had our first one, which was extremely successful and wonderful. And tonight we have our second one, where we welcome Joan Monferretti, who is a phenomenal cook. I've actually had the honor to know Joan, Joan for the past 14 years when she catered my daughter's bat mitzvah. Joan is actually doing the cooking demonstration from her home, and we first of all want to thank her husband, Hamid, for being the video person. He's actually managing 2 different iPads, so we can have a perfect view of the entire cooking demonstration. Joan is born in rural Manitoba and raised on a farm where homegrown was not a catchphrase. She participated from honey extraction to gardening at an early age and had laid a groundwork for her passion, that was cooking. She was trained at the Red River Community College in Winnipeg, and she has over 30 years experience managing kitchens from private clubs, restaurants, and hotels. She's a proponent of higher culinary values and professionalism. Special project during her career was that she was a team leader during the opening of 19 Hyatt hotels. She did a lot of different guest chefs gigs as far as Jakarta, Indonesia, and she created a cookbook with Cooking with Gas, a Park Hyatt farewell cookbook featuring all the culinary team members at the time. We want to thank Joan for taking the time to do this for us, and we also want to mention that Joan has started a catering company called 213, which I've tried many times, which is outstanding. And every week she comes out with a special menu. You can actually add your name to the mailing list to get that mailing every week. And this week she's generously giving 10% off in honor of us participating in this cooking demo and for Emunah. So if there's any questions during this demonstration, please go to your Q&A, and they should all be addressed to Marissa, and Marissa will facilitate the questions. So everybody enjoy, and thank you, Joan, again for doing this wonderful demonstration. We can't wait to see what you have in store for us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. Well, our topic tonight is beef, and it's a topic near and dear, I think, to many of our hearts. And it's sort of a bit of a difference in some things are very different in the kosher kitchen. And you know, having obviously worked outside of kosher predominantly, and now at the Park Hyatt we had a kosher kitchen there. So I've been working in kosher, overseeing kosher operations as well as the regular operations for 25 years now. And so now we're focused on kosher. So tonight I wanted to show you some of the differences before we get started in the beef product. And I know that we all probably, if you're on this call, you do enjoy to eat beef. So, and I find it very confusing. A lot of things are very confusing on the retail level. And that's done to, there's a lot of names for different cuts of steaks or different cuts of beef. That it's really a marketing ploy to help, sell new cuts or more of the off cuts of beef and so forth. So just to get started quickly tonight, we're doing three different things. We're doing, first we're going to be doing Swiss steak. We're going to be using the cap of the ribeye. And if we just have a closer look at that, Mr. Cameraman. We're using the cap of the ribeye tonight to make our Swiss steaks. These, I purposely chose 2 ribeye steaks that look a lot different tonight because I wanted to also demonstrate how, we think that this beautiful cherry red is actually going to be a better steak in a lot of cases. It's most likely not going to be. The deeper the color, the more burgundy, that likely the more age on the animal before it was butchered. After it was butchered, excuse me. And therefore more tender eating. We're also looking for the marbling, not too great. Not too great on that one either, but we know because of the color that this is going to probably provide it will provide a more tender cut to enjoy later. I wanted to also demonstrate that because in the kosher kitchen, we are only using the front portion of the animal. The ribeye luckily is included in that. But, it's nice to, I think this gives a really nice plate presentation when we actually take all of this off and butcher it right down to end up with something that resembles really does look like a tenderloin, but this is what we call a center cut ribeye. So lots of good marbling. It actually eats better, in my opinion, than an actual tenderloin. But I just wanted to point that out. So tonight, the flat iron steak, which you probably know better as a London broil, is something that is a very lean steak and actually eats really, really well when we give it a quick hot type of cooking, be that on a barbecue or in the pan here, as we'll do this evening. What did I want to tell you with this? Right, so obviously all these cuts are coming from the ribeye forward. The chuck is where this is coming from, and for those who aren't familiar with this kind of steak and maybe haven't really figured out where it's coming from, if you've ever bought a top blade roast, this particular muscle runs through that roast, but it's a particular muscle that is more tender and can be used. It's really best with a really quick kind of cooking like we would do with a flank steak. So I'm just going to put that aside for now. And we're going to get started on the cooking because I'm doing 3 different things tonight, and this is real time. I'm not going to magically pull something out that's already cooked aside, except for the sides. We're going to do the final plate up later. And I know that Marissa's going to help with any questions. Feel free to text in any questions. To me, this all makes perfect sense, but maybe it doesn't to you. So we've already, so I'm starting on the Swiss steak. These were taken from the cap of a whole ribeye in the kosher kitchen. Back to the difference between kosher and regular meat. It's really about availability. And as we all know, kosher meat is dearly expensive. And a lot of that has got to do with the additional steps required to ensure that the animal wasn't sick, that it was inspected properly before it went any further down the supply chain. So there's aspects of it that just take more time, therefore more labor, therefore more money. So we've already partially flattened these steaks out because I didn't want to spend a lot of your time making a lot of noise. The ribeye, or the cap of the ribeye, can also be used much like the flat iron, a very quick cooking type of steak. Tonight I chose to use it because in the kosher kitchen we do sell a lot, or we serve a lot of ribeye, a lot of the center cut ribeye, and we're left with that steak. So, we're left with the cap. So we're finding different ways to utilize the cap. The Swiss steak, the nice thing with that particular cut is that we can use a much tougher and much less expensive cut in order to do it. So tonight, because this is already a tender cut, it's not going to take a lot of time in the pan. And don't worry, I'm not burning my house down. Smoke is good because I'm heating this up for the flat iron later. Okay, so I'm heating the pan for the Swiss steak. I've got everything pre-measured, pre-done, so I'm going to find out if my recipe actually works along with you.
Joan, before you begin, somebody asked what type of pan. Sorry, Joan. What type of pan are you putting it in?
This happens to be a Calphalon pan, so not exactly a nonstick. It's old enough that anything nonstick is gone. They don't last a lifetime. They tell you that, but they really don't. So what I'm doing is I'm heating the pan. I can tell when it's hot enough. I'm using canola oil because it's got a high smoke point, and we're using a very lean cut of meat. So I am going to need that extra fat in order to do the searing I want to do. And I find that one of the big mysteries in life is how to make a good sauce and how to make a good sauce sort of quickly with the ingredients we have on hand.
Joan, I have a question. Somebody would like to know, is barbecuing a steak the same as frying it in a pan on high heat?
No. When we refer to barbecuing, we would imagine that it's actually done outdoors on a barbecue. This grill I've got heating up here, it's going to give me it's very similar in the same effect as far as having grill marks on it because it's a cast iron grill plate, but it's not going to have that charcoal flavor.
Okay, and one person, Bev asked, what is a brazier?
This is not quite a brazier because it's not quite straight-sided. The braziers tend to be straight-sided, but it can be used in the same way. I like this particular pan because I've got lots of flat surface area to do this kind of searing. And it's also deep enough that when I'm doing larger amounts and so forth, there's plenty of room for the broth or whatever we're putting into it. And yes, you can do this on an electric stove. It's not as much fun. So I like to swirl it around and get that oil all around the steak.
Somebody asked, could we please get a closer view with the other camera of what is in your pan? Somebody has asked, if possible.
I'm sorry, the second camera?
Yeah, if you can just see what's in your pan at the same time, possible.
I apologize because you probably can hear me. I hope you can. But because of my stand, I'm about to turn up one more notch because I'm smoking myself out here. I may not hear you for everything.
Okay, so if the camera could just go on top of the pan for a second, thank you.
Sorry?
If we can get a closer view, somebody's asked for in the pan.
Sure. Closer view of the pan.
Perfect.
And you're starting to get a little bit of juices coming out of the steaks. That's normally a pretty good indication that we have a nice sear. And here we go, nice brown. So I'm just flipping them over. Oh, you know what? I think I forgot the first part of what I suggested we do, and that was the seasoning. There we go. I'm going to add it in now. I'm adding a little bit of salt. I'm going to be a little cautious with that. Depending on the cut, the salting process may or may not come in contact with this because we're using the outside of the ribeye. It's quite likely that it's been exposed to more salt. I do like to make sure that the meat is as dry as possible before we start any kind of searing. Otherwise, you end up just boiling the meat and you don't get that nice browning. All right, I'm adding my sliced onions. I really enjoy this dish at home, at work, wherever, because you can just do everything in the same pan. And I don't know about you, but I don't like washing pots. So I'm just smushing it around in there, getting some nice color on the onions. I'm adding in the minced garlic. And soon my onions get a little more browning on them. Still pretty blonde, pretty pale. This is the stage that's crucial to have a nice, beautiful brown sauce at the end.
Joan, I have a question from Suzanne. She'd like to know, what is the key to not burn onions and garlic?
Well, add the onions, get your onions started first and then add the garlic. Don't put the garlic in straight off. And like in this case, because we got lots of oil going on, it actually helps keep the heat distribution good, so it's less burning. That's opportunity to burn. You gotta keep it on. You see how I'm shaking the pan? And this is why I like this pan so much. It's because it's rounded at the bottom. So it just kind of slides around in there. All right, flour. You see the onions are nice. They're getting to be a really nice caramelized color. And you know what? Speaking of caramelized onions, one day somebody said they ordered our caramelized onions and said, oh, make sure you don't put any sugar in them. It's like, do people put sugar in caramelized onions? I didn't know that. Okay, so I'm just swishing around again. Get all that flour in there. Basically, I'm making a really quick roux.
One more question. What temperature are you on? Are you still on the high or have you switched it lower at this point?
Yeah, I'm on high.
Okay, so you didn't change the temperature at all from the beginning of searing the steaks.
No, it's been on high all this time. So now I'm gonna get the tomatoes in there. I'm gonna get the red wine in there. Can this be done without red wine? Yes, it can. Red wine just adds a little bit more of a sort of a layer of flavor. If you don't have red wine, don't sweat it. Tomatoes give you the acidity, which is good. See now, we have sort of a, if we get the camera over here and have a close look at this. You see how it's still fairly pink, the red wine looking still like red wine. You're going to see that sort of slowly just start disappearing.
Sorry, how much, somebody would like to know how much flour did you add? They didn't see that in the recipe.
It was 1 tablespoon.
Perfect.
So here's what my beef stock. So again, using beef stock, don't use beef soup base, because of the added salt. Just a stock that has no extra salt in it. Okay, here we go. So I'm basically reducing this to sort of cook off, not sort of, but it will cook off that raw taste of wine. Ladies only hate that taste.
Okay, I have a couple questions. Sorry. What type of red wine is the best, and how can we make this gluten-free? Thank you.
Yeah, a dry red wine is the best. Sorry, I'm just gonna, my flour started, my liquid is pretty much dissipated. So now I'm adding in the stock. I'm just gonna get back to the gluten-free in a second. So now you see we have some pretty nice, I don't know if you can see that from this angle. Lots of juice in there, not enough in my opinion. So I'm going to add a little more stock. Then I'm going to set it aside and let it slowly simmer while we get on to the next item.
Before you continue, there've been some questions. There were 2 things sent with everyone. You had a link to Joan's recipes, and then you had a printable one. All the ingredients are on the link that you can view online. There are some changes on the printable one. So please use the original link, and that'll help you get all of the ingredients, including the flour and the tomatoes. Sorry.
I've also asked for parsley, but we're going to keep the parsley till the end and add it so it has a nice fresh color as well as a fresh flavor. So what's happening right now, you see this is just starting to come up to a simmer. If you can see in this, you see it's still very, very sloppy, very loose, but that's gonna, as it reduces.
So could you, somebody just asked if you can tilt the pan up a bit so we can see the inside. A bit closer. Oh, sorry.
I mean, can you? Okay. Closer over here. There, how's that? There we go. So very, almost like soup right now. So that's going to change soon. If I don't have a beef stock to use, I'm going to jack it up a little more with more like pickling spices, whatever basically I have on hand, and I can add a little more oomph to it. Gluten-free. To make this gluten-free, I would eliminate the. I wouldn't bother putting the cornstarch in like I did the flour. I would braise it and then add the cornstarch at the end. Make a cornstarch slurry, and then add a little bit at the end so you can really see how thick it's going to get. And stop adding once it's thick enough. All right, so we have a nice.
We had one more question. Sorry, Joan. What
Yeah.
degree of doneness are you aiming for these steaks?
Well done. So with this particular cut of meat, we can easily prepare that medium rare or medium and still have like a really tender steak. But because it's a braise, it's really going to get well done. All right, so lid on. I'm just going to move that to the back. We're going to let that simmer. Next up.
While you're starting the next one, could you just explain to Tamar, what's the difference between stock and broth?
Broth would normally have the salt added. It would be, broth would be something that's finished and ready to basically to eat. Stock is what you would make broth with. So stock is the first step. We use seasonings and so forth in making the stock, but we don't typically put any salt in it whatsoever. So then we can do sauces by reduction and so forth and not get over salted. All right, next up is beef ribeye. So again, I'm going to show you, by the time we finish this, a slightly different version of a very quick sauce made from roasting. What I find a lot of people don't really realize is that a really good roast with a tender cut starts with a good sear on the outside. So again, at home, in small quantities, I can use a regular frying pan. It's just a stainless steel heavy bottom frying pan. It's not heavy bottom, don't worry about it. And I'm going to sear this ribeye. So that's why we have the oil. Again, we've trimmed off all the excess fat off of that ribeye.
Sorry, one more question. I apologize. Back to the other recipe. Anne would like to know, where does beef stock come from? And could you just use the instant?
I would highly recommend not using the instant because of the reduction process. You're going to end up getting over salted and overly salty end product.
So how would you suggest, if we can't find in your local store a kosher beef stock, do you have a quick 1-2 recipe?
Sorry, see how this is smoking? That's a good thing. This is the point where we're going to, well, can't forget to season my meat this time. But what are you going to use instead of this? So you could use a little bit of stock, a little bit of the broth rather. I'd probably only do a quarter broth and the rest water. Maybe you increase your red wine a little bit as well, in order to get a few different, in order to still be able to build flavor. And again, you know, what's in stock is carrots, onions, celery, tomato paste, normally bay leaves, possibly thyme, peppercorn, etc. So you just want to be able to add more of those items into what you're cooking, and then you'll end up with so flavorful end result. Okay, so back to this. I think in the recipe I actually said to rub this with the oil as opposed to putting it into the pan. And we don't want to get the pan, we want to get it really nice and hot, but when we're using dry spice, they will burn on the outside. So we do normally like to rub a bit of oil all over it, so it gives us a more even end result. Then we're going to sear. So it's kind of hard to tell. This basically looks like a huge steak right now. I'm going to start with searing normally if we're roasting, I'm not sure if you can really get that, but it would be like going lengthwise, like this way. So we'd be searing like this. course, in larger pans. It's not going to need much time. The idea is just give it a quick sear in order that we keep the juices inside where we want them. What? Huh? Sorry.
I'm just getting.
Got my glasses on, pen written, notes don't really cut it. Oh, slower, sorry, okay. Apologies. I can do that.
Could we just get a camera view on the sear? If possible, the other camera.
And we can get the camera over here for a quick minute. I can show you the nice browning on the outside of that. And we're just gonna keep rolling it over. Give that a minute. I intend to use this same pan to make the sauce in, so I don't want to completely burn the heck out of this. A lot of cooking, my brother-in-law actually summed it up. I wasn't cognizant of the fact that so much of what we do in the commercial kitchens is like we're almost burning things in order to get flavor. So you want to get a really nice, brown, dark stock. You don't want to burn the onions. You don't want to burn the bones, but you want to get it just shy of that in order to get a really nice color and flavor at the end. Okay, so I'm just doing a quick, we've got a nice sear all the way around. I'm mushing it around the pan here a little bit just so that, because the pan's so hot now, that I don't get too much burning of the actual spices there. And now that's going in the oven. And I believe I said something like 12 minutes. There are multiple timers going on here. I don't think I've ever put another one on. So somebody's going to have to remind me if I forget to check the oven in a few minutes. So the remainder of the ingredients I'm going to set aside because these are going to be used for the pan sauce. And the third item is the flat iron, or the London broil. So we've got that ready. Sliced onions are ready. Sliced onions are a separate component. We're going to caramelize onions as a separate component from the flat iron. This is something that's sauce free, I guess. You want to add a barbecue sauce or HP sauce or whatever you want to do. But I thought this was a good alternative for, we don't have a beef broth, we don't have a beef stock, we don't have a veal jus. How to make a nice sauce or how to make a nice accompaniment for this particular steak. So it's obviously, I enjoy caramelized onions. I'm sure most of us do. And it's a great accompaniment. It's easy to do. So here we go back to I said Pam spray, really mean non-stick. I don't work for Pam, but I do like their product compared to every other product. But somebody else in the house went shopping and bought this product. So that's what we have. Okay, so we have the caramelized onion, which I'm actually going to start first on the stove. In this case, I'm just picking a pan that I feel is a suitable size for the amount of product that I have and the amount of onions that I have. This is more or less a non-stick, or was a non-stick at some point in history. I'm going to turn the temperature down just a wee bit on this one. I'm going to go probably about a medium high. I don't want to burn the onions. Somebody raised that question earlier, how to not burn them. Just turn the temperature down a little bit. And then we've got the very angry spice. Because this is going on the grill, I definitely want to make sure I get the oil on it here rather than trying to put it on when it's on the grill and start a fire in my house. So I said 2 teaspoons, but really use your judgment. It looks, I think realistically, that's twice as much as you need on this steak. And it depends on your flavor, how much spiciness you want. This particular spice has, we blend it ourselves, but it has salt in it, but it's pretty limited on the salt. So that's why I tend to add a little extra salt. Okay, caramelized onions are going in. Now, I'm not sure if you can hear that from where you're at, but you know, we have just a nice gentle sizzle. We're not trying to burn them.
Joan, we're going to move on to the stove camera now so we get a better view. So if you can talk into that. Okay, it'll be easier. Thank you.
So I've got the flame here, just a little lower medium, probably medium-high flame. And if you can hear it, you hear such a nice sizzle going on. It's not too much. So when we're doing large amounts of caramelized onions, we always start them in the pan and then we finish them in the oven. And that guarantees that we don't burn them. You get a nice even caramelization. Optional is the red wine. If you don't have red wine or you don't want to use it, you can certainly use water. But I find you'll see once we get to the stage of browning, in order to sort of even out all of that caramelization, a bit of liquid is a good idea. And again, red wine just adds a little bit of a layering of the different flavor. So if we can just have the camera back to our Swiss steak pot for a minute. See, we're still pretty sloppy in there. And because I know these are not tough steaks, I'm going to take the lid off and let it reduce more quickly by removing the lid. You'll find if you haven't used very much oil, you might get little bits that start to brown right away. That's why I keep shaking the pan.
I just had a request, Joan, that if this camera just stays on for now, it's easier for people to see the inside the pan. So if we just switch to the stove camera. Yeah.
For sure. Stove camera is going to stay on for a while. So you see what's happening there, a nice slow caramelization. I'm going to let it rest for a minute. You know, I find that I was looking for the word because with our to-go business that we are really, that has only been our business since COVID started, labeling and giving instructions that are hopefully accurate so folks can actually enjoy the meal as we envisioned it at home is really quite a challenge. And I found it took me a while to find the word agitate. And really, we're agitating, and that's it. So, you know, if you're going to reheat something in the microwave, you know, it's not something you can really stir. It's not something that you can like, use your tongs and do. So really what you want to do is agitate it. So in this case, that's how I perceive agitating. But if it's something in the microwave, you might just need to just kind of move it around a bit so that, you know, the microwave can do its job better or more evenly. Coming along nicely. How are these boys doing back here? They're coming along nicely. I'm sure we all enjoy something braised, just makes the house smell unbelievable. So, you know, you leave the house, you come back, or somebody's coming into the house, they really know that something great's happening in this kitchen. getting along quite nicely there. Shortly, I'll be addressing the flank steak. I really wanted to just check on our ribeye. Not sure how long we've been. Only 7 minutes. Great. Okay. See what's happening here. I'm just going to turn it over. Just going to turn it over so that we don't get it over brown on the one side. So in larger quantities, this is probably the point where you might get it into the oven and let it slowly caramelize. You probably put it in the oven at about, I'm not sure, 325. So it continues caramelizing. But I'm just about at the point now where I'm going to add the red wine. You see, get the camera back on this braids over here. See the sauce is, you can see the sauce is thickening. Looking pretty good. Couple more minutes, and I'm just going to turn that off until we get back to it. Okay. So now I'm going to add the red wine. This is going to, you're going to see what's happening here with the camera. Can you see from there? Pretty much dissipated my, all the liquid evaporated pretty much immediately. I'm just going to slow that down. And I'm going to use my favorite implement in the kitchen, the pod filler. Just add a little more moisture to it. So now you can see it's starting to even out. And the nice thing with water, it evaporates. So if you add a little too much, don't worry about it. It's going to evaporate. You need to turn the heat up to evaporate more of it. Okay. So we're going to let that slowly simmer. And then I'm going to get this flat iron on the grill. So if we want to just have a look back here, you see how I haven't touched the temperature on the Swiss steaks, but as it's reducing, it's getting thicker, and you see how the simmering is getting a little more intense as the amount of volume is reducing. And I say, if you have extra sauce at the end of the day, nothing wrong with that. Okay, so my little char broiler has stopped. The little char broiler has stopped smoking. That's a good sign. I'm just dabbing my paper towel in some of that canola oil.
Joan, somebody just wants to let you know the timer is finished for the steak in your oven.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
That was Noah.
So I'm just giving this a wipe off like you would do on the barbecue. So if there's any bits of whatever burnt bits on there, I'm gonna give it a chance. Sorry, I'm gonna give it a chance to to burn those off. Have a look at the ribeye. Oh yeah. So I'm not going to sear the outside here. This really lets me know when I touch it how rare it is. So it's starting to firm up a bit, but we've still got a pretty rare little roast going on there. And as it pertains to, we're on this thing, right? As it pertains to doneness, it's not an exact science, but if you're trying to figure out, is my steak close to medium, or is it medium rare, or is it very rare? The old trick before we used thermometers was to use put your pinky to your thumb and touch where your thumb muscle is here. And this is well done. Go to your ring finger, relax, softer, that's about medium. Go to your middle finger, very soft, that's rare. So that just, it's a guideline, depending on the cut of meat you have, depending how muscular you are. It's always going to vary, but it's a good guideline to keep in mind to understand how well done your steaks are. See, the onions are getting nice and caramelized. Most of that extra liquid is now gone. I'm just going to set that aside. We're going to come back to that. So I'm liking this consistency on the steak. Let me just get a spoon so that it's a little more illustrative. So I like that consistency. I don't want it any thicker than that. So at this stage now, I'm dropping in some of my parsley. Of course, I have more because I have shares in a parsley farm. I'm just going to set that aside. Now we're going back to the flank. So I really can't hold my hand here for any more than, I don't know, as long as I'm holding it here, which isn't very long. So it means it's really nice and smoking hot. So we always want to put the top side, the nicest side of the steak down first. I'm choosing that side. I always like to work on an angle. And I think in the recipe I suggest that we're going to steer it one direction, we're going to move it, we're going to turn it so that we get that nice diagonal cut, and now we're going to flip it over. Back in my hamburger flipping days, the rule was do not flip that burger until you see the blood starting to come up, then flip it. So from those days, that's where a lot of times people will put the marks on one side, turn it over, put the marks on it, turn it back over, put the marks on it. I guess you can do that, but I know that I want the top side to look the best, so I'm going to pay the most attention to it, and it's going to have the last little bits of crumbs and so forth that are going to burn. So we always want to present the top side as the best side. So sometimes when I'm doing labels for reheating of certain things, and I'm in my imagination, I'm thinking, yeah, but they gotta, all that smearing I'm doing, how do I say that? Like, I want to smear that, hang on, back to Mr. Ribeye. Yeah, smearing, see all that good stuff there? I can't tell you how upset I get when I see somebody putting that pan in the sink. Because this is some really good stuff going on here, and we're not there yet in terms of doneness. We're getting there.
Joan, while you're quickly doing that, somebody asked, can you broil what you're doing now? Can you broil it in the oven if you don't have one of these pans?
I suppose yes. I suppose the answer is yes. I don't think the answer, I think if I don't have something like this, I would just use a pan. I think that would be the preferable way. So I just turned it so it's going to get a nice sear on the other side. This range, this is actually not the highest. A little late now. The way this range works, these are simmer elements. They don't get as hot as this guy and that guy, but that's okay. It'll work fine. Okay. we've got Swiss steaks that are ready. I'm just gonna taste the sauce. Oh yeah, that's what we're talking about. So that is excellent in my opinion. I think I forgot to use my nonstick product, but because I used the oil on the napkin, it's nice and smoking hot, hasn't been an issue, nothing sticky. If you are going to be grilling fish, always use nonstick spray on your barbecue or whatever. It really, really helps make sure that you don't leave half your fish on the broiler. Okay, so we're going to do that a couple more minutes.
While you're waiting with that, could you just discuss, people say sometimes they see this type of steak, but it's much thicker. How would you adjust the cooking times?
Well, that's a good question. I apologize. So much of what we do is by touch and feel. And that's been one of the challenges with COVID as well. It's really good to actually doing this at home because it's touch, it's feel, it's really hard. I would say that you probably, you wouldn't double the time. You probably increase, if it's twice as thick, I'd say you'd probably increase your time by about 25%, maybe 30%. Okay, back to Mr. Ribeye. So now, as you can sort of tell, I'm looking at it, but I'm definitely getting more resistance when I touch it with the tongs. Gonna give this a little smear, pick up some of that extra browning on the meat. And I think we're ready for a rest. One of the really important things in meat cooking, if you're cooking to rare, medium, even well done for that matter, it's allow resting time. Because if we decide, okay, we're just going to cut into it now, you're going to see all the meat juices are on the cutting board. You want to make sure that rests. Small cut like that, ideally about 10 minutes. And with the bigger cuts, we'll rest them as long, if we're doing like a whole prime rib or something. Try to rest it half an hour before we actually start cutting into it. Because obviously we all want a juicy steak or a juicy cut of beef, and it's a shame to leave it on the cutting board. Okay, so now we have what looks like a mess for somebody to clean up. I am going to go back to find there we go. So I didn't end up with any oil left in my pan. I'm just going to put a little bit of what I had left there. Pan's quite hot because of the oven. As a cook, we always try to remember to carry around. I wonder why everyone's always carrying around a towel. It helps you resist the urge to accidentally touch that hot handle. It just came out of the oven and burned the heck out of yourself. So I'm turning on the flame back on. And then I'm going back to my frying steak and turning it over.
Joan, back to what people are saying for the flat iron steak. They're saying London broil is sold a lot and it's much thicker. Would this be more like a minute steak or a flat iron or a London broil? Another name for flat iron.
It should be the same cut, but I think like so many things, depending how big the animal was it came off of. Number one, number two, how the butcher that we received it from, where they cut off. So, obviously the thicker parts are the prime cuts. So you're right, it is thin. Particular one is quite thin, but it is the same cut.
So should they cut the London broil, or somebody asked, do they flatten it or butterfly it?
No, I wouldn't. I would leave it whole for sure. I wouldn't butterfly it. Okay, I think we're good to go on London broil. back to the ribeye pan. Make a quick sauce. So these are just the onions right now. I'm adding the onions, the garlic. Red wine. Oh, excuse me, this is the balsamic. I chose to do balsamic on this one just to show that you can, you don't need to use wine. Just gives a different, if you have vinegar, red wine vinegar is nice. You wouldn't use as much as you would with wine because you don't want it sour. But it definitely adds a nice flavor. And then I have some veal jus here. And again, quite thick. I want to give it a chance to simmer, so I'm just going to rinse this out and add a little more water. The water doesn't harm it. I'm just evaporating. So once this has a minute to simmer, then we make the decision. Do we like seeing all the onions in it or not? And if we don't, then we just strain it. If we don't mind seeing the onions in it, then we're going to leave them in. I think for tonight's purposes, I'm going to leave them in. Take a minute. Okay. So if I want these a little moisture, which I think I do, I'm just going to give them a little more moisture. It's small batch, frankly, small batch cooking is harder than quantity. Things evaporate quicker. How are we doing for time?
We're good. We're hitting 8:30, but you can finish off. Don't worry.
We're at 8:30? Okay, we're almost there. Okay, I'm going to turn this down so that I can hear. And next is going to be plate up. So I'm just going to let that simmer for a second. Just going to show that it's still quite loose, which is good. I'm going to pre-prepared a number of different sides, potential options for our steaks. And I think we're going to start with the flank. We chose a long plate for the flank. I'm going to set this guy aside. I just want to point out this, you see how this consistency is getting nice and thickened. I would say this is where we're done. I don't want to see it any thicker than this. I'm just going to give it a taste. Yeah, the balsamic gives it a nice boost. All right. So, of course, against the grain is the key to success here. I always like to slice it on a bit of an angle, because then it's a little nicer on the plate. This is, in my imagination, this is a portion for two. If you're a light eater, it could, maybe you can get it to 3. This is 400 grams or just under a pound. And I realize that we have some American friends with us here. Oh, see, that's telling me that I should be done by now. You see how, even with that short resting time, there's very little juices left on the board. So now we're going to put the onions on there. And just break that up. So you see, but just adding a little bit of the water back in just to make a nice, moist, caramelized onion. Sorry, the wrong side. You have to figure out how to put smell into Zoom, I think. It smells really nice. Okay, so I like the cauliflower. Today I used a little bit of our herb de Provence spice blend. Roasted this with extra virgin olive oil, olives, a little bit of sun-dried tomato, and I think we're going to use, these potatoes happen to come from my garden, I'm very proud to say, and it's February, and I still have some of them kicking around, so that's good news. So that's our first entree. Lots of steak, not too much vegetables, just the way the meat lovers love it. We're going to go to Swiss steak next. Chose this plate because it's got a bit of a bowl to it. I think my all-time favorite with any kind of braise is mashed potatoes. I apologize, the potatoes are not hot. You had some nice garlic chives, which is what I'm using in these particular mashed potatoes. And where are we? I'm going to plate up one of them for our purposes this evening. Lots of sauce. And what do I like? I'm going to try, I don't think I like them. Do the heirloom carrots. And a few of our haricot vert with fresh lemon zest, extra virgin olive oil. Okay. Number 2 dish. Maybe it to myself. Myself the best vantage. And last but not least, we're going to do the ribeye. So we call this a center cut. Back in the day when I worked at the Park Hyatt, we called it a park cut. Here we've got options. If you want to just cut a nice, tonight, I'm just going to do one really beautiful, nice thick cut. So still a little on the rare side, but I don't think my audience here is complaining. And we give the purple potatoes a go, chateau style. I think I'm the only person on the planet left who really loves doing chateau potatoes. I'm going to put a few of our mixed peppers. You end up with a very, very colorful dish. Parsnips. I personally prefer the parsnips really cooked, roasted, almost dry, because they become very, very sweet. And let's see, we'll give our little sweet potato kugel shot at this. And there we have it. So, oh, sauce. Can't forget sauce. And there we go. So, I to cook and talk, but here we are. Set that aside. And with that, Any questions? Anything that I can maybe share some insights on?
Yes, first of all, everything looks beautiful, and I want to thank you. We do have quite a few questions. So maybe, Ellie, if you want to switch to the other camera so we can see Joan as she talks. So the first question I have for you is, when you rest your meat, how do you avoid serving cold meat then if you're resting it for 10 minutes to your guests?
You notice where I place it, just on the back of the stove, or someplace warm. In the restaurants, we always have like a hot pass, so we would rest it up there or above the stove, on the shelf above the stove, just somewhere warm. Or maybe you turn the oven off and you can just open the door, and just somewhere that's warm but not hot, because you don't want to continue cooking it.
Mhm.
And that's really it. 10 minutes on a steak like this, it's not going to be cold. And certainly for what you gain in terms of the eating quality with all the juices still in it by allowing it to rest, I think far outweighs having a smoking hot steak. Now, if you want smoking hot, braise is the way to go.
Okay. Somebody also asked, in terms of prepping in advance, can you make the caramelized onions in advance?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And you know, the thing with something like caramelized onions, they microwave really well. I like to try to, again, like with the to-go menus, because people are, you know, at home and maybe you only have one oven, and now you got to do all these different things in it. So I try to mix it up so certain things are good for microwaving and certain things are better to reheat in the oven. So anyway, caramelized onions definitely can easily be reheated in the microwave. That's probably where I would do it.
Okay, a couple other questions, sorry. What you've plated, do you offer ever something similar on your menu, and do you offer the same sides, and how is it packaged then when somebody receives it?
Well, thank you for asking that. Something like this, like the Swiss steaks, we absolutely have offered. We try to change it up every week. Something like the ribeye, we would send that out as a steak, so it would be seared as a steak on both sides, because obviously it's not going to look like that when you reheat it. But we certainly do have our ribeye in different formats on our menus. As far as the packaging goes, these little black containers, depending how many people it's for, if it's one portion, for example, of vegetables, they normally end up in this little guy, pretty much as you see it here. Most of these things, I think maybe the only exception is the chateau potatoes, because I'm serious, I'm the only person that loves to make them, and sometimes it's just too much, I'm too busy to do it. So that we don't do on the to-go menus. Everything else here we do. With the packaging, again, if it's 1 or 2 people, you know, we've got sort of 3 sizes of these little black guys. So, you know, if it's in there, we lid them. Instructions are going on the top. The read instructions. If it needs to get removed from this, we've made a mistake, you know, ruined somebody's dinner because we packed it in this and we didn't tell them take it out of that before you put it in the oven, put it into something oven safe. So we've learned from those kind of mistakes to make sure that there's no misunderstandings, because these don't go in the oven. They do go in the microwave though. So there's a variety of things. You know, it certainly doesn't, unfortunately, we can't get it to your house looking like this, but we do our best to make sure that it's packaged. So if it's a larger amount of people, so normally once we get to 4 or more of any particular menu item, then we'll break it out into, we'll start packing in like the aluminum foil pans. So then in most cases, those things, if it's in aluminum foil, then that's something that goes straight in the oven. Maybe
Perfect.
just
Another question, is there a difference between grass-fed meat and regular fed wheat-fed meat that you find personally?
Yeah, grass-fed is, being raised on a farm, we're pretty familiar with, you know, the ins and outs of this kind of thing. Grass-fed is typically much grainier. There's more of a grain to it. And back in the day when we thought there was differences between Canadian beef and American beef, that was one of the differences that tasting panels would see, is that, oh, the Canadian beef has more of a grain to it. But that's because our animals are roaming freely and having a good time. The reality is that all animals that are coming to, all the beef product is coming, are finished in the lot. So if it's truly just grass fed, I'm not sure where I guess they're feeding them hay, grass hay in the wintertime. But it's really hard to put weight on these animals on grass alone. So if you've seen, like those Brahma bulls, for example, they have bones all over, sticking out of them all over the place. That's what grass fed looks like. A nice grain fed finish, corn fed, whatever finishing in the lots. That's what puts the weight on the animal, and you end up with a really nice marbling and great even quality.
Perfect. One more question. What cut of meat was the Swiss steak?
I used the cap from the ribeye. So back to that. So in this case, I used the cap from the ribeye. But in our case, it's not something you can necessarily just buy at the butcher shop.
So what can we ask our butcher to get us?
Yeah, any cut that you use for braising works perfectly for the Swiss steaks.
Okay. Now one that's not so much about cooking, but about you. A few people have asked me what made you go for kosher food, cooking with your huge, experience and everything. Why kosher food?
Question. You know what? It's a challenge, and it's I don't say that in a negative way. It's a challenge to learn. It's kind of like learning a different language, I guess, because there's certain things that you can do, certain things you can't do. Different times you can do it, other times you can't do it, et cetera, et cetera. So first of all, there was that challenge of really kind of being able to, when I started the Park Hyatt, which is now like 25 years ago, I'll never forget it because the kosher kitchen was operating at that time in the hotel, and the sous chef who was in charge of the kosher kitchen, I didn't know anything about. I never even heard of kosher, frankly, at that point, from the West, but he took it upon himself to educate me in kosher, and what I came to know pretty quickly was that most of it was fallacy. But what I did realize is that there's really an opportunity to cook as well in kosher as we do in any other like in the regular kitchen, and it's just a matter of finding out how to utilize those ingredients and not just trying to substitute like man-made ingredients where you don't need to. Where, for example, not that there's anything particularly wrong with margarine, I guess, if you're a turkey and you want to eat it, but olive oil, extra virgin olive oil is so wonderful, and we can use it at any time. And now there's so many great like grapeseed oil. There's all these great oils that we can use, and we don't need to depend on butter. And it's a transition to learn to cook without the dairy, particularly things like butter, like used in this kind of product. But I think it's frankly healthier if you're careful about it, And regardless of all that, it's when the hotel was going to go into its major renovation, which 3.5 years later, it still hasn't reopened. It just seemed like low-hanging fruit, but this was a market that, it's a market that it's because it's a niche market. It's something that we can actually get to know people in and actually try to understand what the needs and wants are, and hopefully excel at delivering.
Lovely. And I don't see any more questions coming on chat. So Joan, on behalf of Emunah Canada and Emunah of America, we want to thank you so much for tonight. It was truly informative. And for those of us in Toronto, some of us cannot wait to sample your food this weekend and ongoing. And I've posted Joan's email on the on the chat, as well as our site. Oh, we do have one more question. I apologize. Somebody saw cookbooks when you were zooming in on your kitchen somewhere. You want to know which are your cookbooks you have there, if you can recommend what a chef really uses.
I love cookbooks. Depends what I'm looking for. If I'm looking for inspiration, then I'm probably going to.
Hold on, we just need a camera. Oh, you're going to bring the cookbooks. Perfect.
Culinaire. So I've been subscribing to Art Culinaire pretty much since their inception. So I love these books because they're super colorful and super inspiring. Lots of great stories about the chefs behind them and just, you know, the presentations and sort of cutting edge what's going on out there. So for inspiration, those are always a go-to for me. For recipes that really work, I go to Joy of Cooking a lot. I find Joy of Cooking, you know, it always surprises me. It's like, oh, I wonder where I can find this. It's like, oh, let me go to Joy of Cooking. So I go to the internet for like general, like, oh, I really don't know what, you know, whatever is. So I'll go there to sort of get the Wikipedia version. And then it's like, okay, now I get it. And then go back to that. The other thing I really enjoy are my Time Life series books. Again, lots of really good, solid recipes that let me just go get one. So I don't even know if you can buy these anymore, Time Life series, but again, lots of really well illustrated on techniques. So I like that. So if you're dealing with something that you've never really dealt with before, you can really see picture by picture exactly what it is. And then for the commercial kitchen, I use our for baking and pastries and such. Professional baking and professional cooking books are like for the bulk cooking to get those formulas and so forth for the larger scale. So those are my primary go-tos, but I mean, every city I've been to, I come back with a cookbook. So I have a lot of cookbooks.
Thank you. Okay, so no more questions. Joan, this was phenomenal, very informative. Your stuff looks amazing. Again, we thank everyone who was part of tonight, and especially Joan and her camera husband. Thank you, Hamid, for helping, and we really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you. Pleasure.